Yeah. But is it good to just run from whatever the resolution that we have there?
Oh, here he is. Yeah. I didn't even know you were here.
Hey, Mo.
I didn't even know you were here this week.
All happened at the last minute. I was supposed to come on Saturday. My flight got cancelled and I booked the wrong day. Ended up on Monday evening. I came yesterday night. So.
You're here now.
Yes.
Good enough.
So if everyone can come in and take seats, we are about to begin.
Jesus.
All right, it's about that time. Welcome to the PERC meeting here at IETF 97. If that is not the journey you're looking to go on today, you're in the wrong room. So, we've been in action for a little while. You are auto-playing. Note well, by this point of the week, you've probably seen this once or twice. If you know of any IPR, please disclose it and read all those link documents or have your lawyer read them for the details. So where are we as a working group? We've got a few milestones. Since the last meeting, Suhas and I looked at these. I think one of these, the last we talked was in September of 2016, which is clearly past. So being optimistic, we went ahead and pushed them all out to June of next year, figuring we could probably meet that milestone.
We're almost there.
And thanks for our kind AD for not noticing when we did that. So where are we? So we are in about the same state in terms of adopted documents as we were last time. Suhas and I have spent a few minutes talking about, where we might want to go with this group, and we'll have some where do we go from here discussion at the end because progress has slowed down a little bit. We've put some stars here next to drafts that we've adopted, we've talked about for a while, and have kind of started to stabilize, and we've had some rounds of comments. We've had comments addressed in the latest versions, and we might now be willing to consider last call on. So we'll circle back to this at the end and discuss what we want to last call, what we think needs more time, and what we should spend more effort on or not at the end of this meeting. So look at the stars, note which documents they correspond to, and keep all that in mind as you listen to the presentations today. Here is the agenda. Any bashes on that for now? Everyone okay with their time slots, allocations, any topics that we need to cover? All right, and then it looks like Fluffy is first up to talk about double.
Trying to remember which time zone I'm in, much less what the slide is. Okay, so double, there's not too much to say. Let's go to the next slide on that one, please. There, thank you very much.
That's right. Now let me try it again. No, let me do it the other way.
So the major change since the last time is, you remember we always had in this draft text that there's things that they're end-to-end encrypted, things that are hop-to-hop encrypted. There are certain headers that may have been inserted by the media distributor, and your question is which ones of those can the endpoint trust? And we discussed at the last meeting that really the only one of those that we had a use case for and thought was important coming from the media distributor down to the endpoint was the mixer to client audio levels.
John Lennox. I don't remember that description, but that seems very unlikely to me because that only happens if you're mixing audio, which you're not.
No, it happens if you're switching audio and sent down 4 copies and want the far end to. Oh, it only happens. I see your. I
mean, client to mixer may be forwarded even though you're forwarding it on, but mixer to client is for the mixed audio with C sources.
Right. Yeah, dumbfounded. I don't know what to say. Exactly. Good start. Okay. We did decide this.
What about mixer to mixer?
Sorry?
What about mixer to mixer for cascaded?
So which one did I actually put in the draft? Can somebody glance this for a second here? There is no mixer to mixer, but
you use mixer to client for cascaded links, even for the cascaded links.
I'm sure I put into the draft what the minutes said. I may have put complete gibberish into this slide. Sean walks into a prime moment of complete disaster at the beginning of the meeting. It's like, somebody can check that. There was only one thing added to that list. Yes, how the mixer that can't access the media would know the audio level. Oh no, it copies it from the other one. It gets the client to audio. It gets the client to mixer. It copies it into the mixer, and then see, Ronnie, you knew the answer. You didn't tell me. Okay.
Okay, I think I looked it up. I think what this is saying that if the originating endpoint,
right,
trusted endpoint was itself a mixer and put it in the header in the first place, you can forward it.
Okay.
I think that's all that's saying, which is
that would make sense.
Well, ish,
sort of. Maybe.
I don't know why you'd architect it that way, but if you were to, it would make.
I guess we do have some systems that are like sort of hybrid, but I agree with you. It's not making a lot of sense. I don't think there's any problem with it. That's the change I made. Give us some thought to that change. It may be that change is complete gibberish, and who knows what we were thinking at the last meeting. I fixed more than a few typos, and there's basically no other issues or things that have been raised since really about 8 months ago on this one. So I think that this one, that's where it is. So let's move on to the next one, EKT, where there's actually a lot of changes happened. So first of all, huge thanks to Russ. I got probably one of the best reviews I've ever gotten of any draft. It was I knew what to do with them. It was very concrete. I went through with them, but this resulted in a lot of changes. Next slide here. So a couple of these things we're fixing fairly small things or being able to deal with issues like how, which direction you truncate salt information. The big change was moving some implicit sizes to explicit. I'll talk more about that in a second. Just added some missing things like IANA tables, and made it a little bit, cleaned up some text that had been laying around for a very long time, but needed spring cleaning on really the DTLS extension. So got that cleaned up. The implicit size to explicit. Let's go to the next slide, which is basically the open issue. Right in the older drafts, we didn't have an explicit length header for how long the encrypted, how long the plain text was effectively that became encrypted, and how you figured that out was by looking around at a few different things to know which cipher you were using, know which the SRTP master key length would have been, and then you could compute what the size of this block was, and you could figure out how many bytes off the header, reading backwards from the front of the package, how large a field to take. That's caused a lot of confusion for people along the ways, including when Russ read this, he's like, this doesn't work. You don't have all the information you need. It would be somewhat complicated to get. So what I did to address Russ's comment on that there And Russ, we were thanking you earlier for one of the best reviews ever. Don't leave. So what we did with this is just like, added a 1 byte length header to this field. It makes it very clear and simple how this stuff goes. I think some people are concerned, say like, look, we don't need that. We'd prefer to not add this byte, that there's another way to implicitly figure this out. My feeling is that this byte only gets added to the EKT long message, which only goes in some of our RTP packets, right? So when we put in periodically, and it expands it slightly, and it just reduces the number of ways you can cause a lot of confusion. Probably makes this much easier to extend later. So I think that this is just a really simplifying change at a very low cost. So I think that this was the biggest open issue to me, is whether we want to keep this one or not. Has anyone read this or have strong opinions about this bits and pieces of it? Okay. Don't worry, you should see my
EKT.
previous slide where I was like totally lost. This certainly addresses the issue. This is about the issue you raised of not being able to compute the size. I added an explicit size. It makes it really easy after that point. We could probably do it without a size, but my preference is to do that. So if, yeah, everyone, yeah, through several, yeah. And that's pretty much it on open issues of this. So next slide on this one. So my feeling of where we are on this one is it's ready for a first working group last call. I mean, there's really not many issues. There's no known issues open with it right now. I think if people go through and read it carefully, maybe people will decide, no, there's some really big issues here, Cullen, you're nuts. Or maybe people will decide, there's some small things we need to change and we're pretty close. But, oh yeah, well, let's stick with the nuts. Yeah. Don't need a hum to figure that one out. I blame the IETF. Important information to give non-com. So, I don't know. Any other things people want to talk about with these two decks? But I mean, we're at a fairly low energy point. I don't think we're going to get a lot of, I think that this is the right step to get to the next level of review, figure out what's done, and move this stuff on.
Yeah. So we've got some time at the end to talk about working group last calls on these two and a couple others. So I'll defer that to the end. Thank you, Colin. Next up is Adam.
Yes, Adam Fortuna.
Is Adam in the room?
No.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Paul Jones. I'm here to talk about the tunnel draft. Actually, is Paul remote? Because I know he wants to.
He's on
Okay, good. He wants to be available for this, and I might have to lean on him a little bit for the final slide. But let's go ahead and get started. So there were a few small changes in tunnel this time around, and these are all based on the discussions that we had at the last IETF, where we switched the tunnel transport from DTLS back to TLS. We changed the key field names so that they're the same as 5764. It's, cosmetic. We introduced a conference identifier field, and that's actually the thing that I am probably going to lean a little bit on Paul to help describe the rationale. And then we switched back to what we had in the first version of the draft, which was a TLS style syntax for describing these, as opposed to sort of the traditional pluses and lines with fixed fields, just because this is a lot easier to work with, a lot easier to read, a lot easier to write. Next. So it probably is not really a good use of our time to step through these, other than to point out that we also have, in the process of this, added some additional message types. I think we had 3 before, and now we have 5. We added specifically a error message for indicating that the versions that are on both sides of this connection don't match, and that we need to do something to recover. Now, we've probably do want to engage into some conversation about exactly what those recovery procedures look like, because it's a little bit weird to figure out, once you disconnect and reconnect or what have you, exactly how you indicate, now I need to do something different than the last time so we succeed. And we also have an endpoint disconnect message that the mixer uses, well, the media distributor uses to tell the key distributor that someone has left, you need to rekey things. Like I said, we probably can more or less skip through these unless someone wants to dig into specific details about the profile keys or tunnel messages.
If you have things you want to discuss, we have plenty of time.
It's okay.
Super important. So what are the IANA registry rules for the message type?
They're in there. I'm trying to remember exactly what they are.
The one I tech field.
I mean, Deshaun, do you think we should engage in the conversation around this, or okay, all right. All right, so I think we can probably just scroll through very quickly the next 4 or 5 slides that sort of show all this. Oh wait, actually this is somewhat illustrative. It's the new diagram in the document that basically just points out we set up a TLS connection, and then the media distributor is going to say, here are the profiles of support that you can use as part of the DTLS establishment with endpoints as they join. The DTLS handshakes with all of the clients proceed as normal. They're encapsulated in these tunnel messages between the media distributor and the key distributor with a couple of indications. One is, who is this? Like, which of the associations that we've established is this? And which conferences does this correspond to? That's the conference ID that we've added. So if this has any questions, if not, keep going. Syntax, we can skip this. We can skip this. Like I said, we can stop and go back to these if anyone's interested in talking about them in particular. But I guess the one thing to note here is all of these have these conference IDs in them. Skip this. And yeah, that's not useful either. And that's even less useful. Okay, so the one big thing that we probably do want to highlight here is that when we were trying to work through some of the information flow about how you indicate to a KMF what conference someone should be in, like which keys they need to have access to, that was kind of missing from the previous protocols. So what we've added here is an explicit indication of the conference ID. Now we probably need to talk about exactly who generates these, who's in charge of them. The way it's laid out in the spec right now, it's as people join, the key distributor basically tells the media distributor, that person goes in this conference. But I think until we actually work through what the information flows are with things like SIP and Web Rtc, it might not be obvious whether that's exactly the right direction for things to go. At this point, I'm actually going to ask Paul to put himself in line to see if he can explain this final slide 11.
Actually, while he's doing that, can we skip back a slide to the unsupported version?
Sure.
How is the recipient of this supposed to know what version he should support?
So the top level message that this is a sub message of contains a version field.
And that states what version you do support?
Yes.
Okay.
Is Paul here?
You see him in the
Calling Paul Jones.
Or give us some indication.
So is he unable to put himself in the speaker queue?
Paul, if you can hear us, knock twice.
Oh, all right. Well, that's a good proxy. You can probably go ahead and let him go.
Yeah. It's already in, right?
Well, yeah, but you press the button and then he starts talking.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
So, on behalf of Paul Jones, so the different alternatives we have here for the conference ID basically comes down to the question of how and who needs to have the knowledge about the conference ID. On option number one is basically that when we set up a conference on the media distributor, we tell the media distributor, this is conference X. These are the participants. And then the media distributor with his first tunneled DTLS message towards the KMF can basically transfer that knowledge over to the key management function. That's option number one. Option number two on the table is basically the signaling does not tell the media distributor anything about the conference ID. It just tells it like, I want to create a new conference, and this participant goes into that conference, and go talk to this KMF, please, for this participant. And then once the KMF has basically given access to the participant, once it sends the media keys back to the media distributor, the KMF basically says like, here's the conference ID for this participant, and that way the media distributor learns which conference IDs, which participant has which conference ID, and therefore to whom to forward the media. And the last option on the table, actually, to go one slide back, one of the problems with the approach of with the second approach is if a participant wants to join two conference calls at the same time, and the media distributor just forwards the DTLS packets to the KMF, the only way for the key distributor to distinguish different participants is basically by the fingerprint of their certificate. So if we make the requirement that if a client wants to join two conferences at the same time, he has to use two different certificates, then it is no longer a problem for the KMF to distinguish these two different conferences for the same participant. So if we make that requirement, then potentially we could even eliminate the whole conference ID field as part of the tunneling message, because then the signaling could basically go and say to the media distributor, here's a conference X, these are the participants. Obviously for the signaling itself, we could set up some conference ID, but it doesn't really matter. And then you do the same thing with the KMF. You also signal it like, here's the conference, these are the participants. Now the KMF and the media distributor don't need to talk about which conference this is about, because they only need to know to forward which DTLS packets. And for the media distributor, he cannot forward packets to the actual participants unless he has received the media keys for the participant. So that's like kind of the, I don't know, stateless option basically, where like the media distributor and the key management function both have a knowledge about who goes into which conference, but they don't, not as part of the protocol, they don't exchange that. These are the three options. I guess like this is probably confusing no matter how I put it, but.
I think you did a better job than I would have. So does anyone have any opinions, input about the best way to coordinate these things? So Niels, you want, it's the first, if I recall correctly, was communication of the ID. Basically, it's you either communicate it from the media distributor to the KMF, and the KMF to the media distributor, or they define it independently. Sorry?
Option one is the media distributor signals it to the KMF. Option two is the other way around. The KMF forwards it to the media distributor. And the third one is there's no conference ID as part of the protocol at all. The underlying problem or requirement here, though, is that if we don't want to make it a requirement that a client needs to use two distinct certificates to be able to join two conferences at the same time, then the option with no conference ID on the table wouldn't work, and the second option where the KMF tells it the MDD would also not work, because the client would come twice to the MDD, both with the same DTLS fingerprint, because he only uses one certificate. In that case, basically, the only option is that the MDD needs to signal towards the KMF, this DTLS connection is for conference A, and this tunnel DTLS message is for conference B. So I guess that's the main question, is whether we want to make it a requirement that a client who wants to participate in 2 conferences at the same time, that he needs to use 2 distinguished certificates, or whether we want to leave it open to reuse an existing certificate multiple times. And just personally, I think we should make it a requirement to use distinct certificates, and then go with option number 3, don't have a conference ID at all as part of the signaling protocol. But we're like open for discussion on that whole topic.
Just to let you know, in the room, there were a couple of rather vigorous head shakes no on that proposition, but I'm certain they'll talk to it in more detail.
Okay.
So, Colin Jennings, it seems to me that when we fit this into the broader architecture that you're going to have in a conferencing system, where there might be like a media resource manager that's setting up multiple conference bridges and selecting which one you use and linking all of this in, that different architectures are going to set this up different ways, and we're pretty likely to have some people who might want the conference ID flowing one way and another group that might want flowing the other way. I think that the question of who can actually, really the only people who can really authenticate the endpoint is probably the KMF, because they're the only people that terminate the DTLS connection. I think that leaves me a little bit like, wow, whoever, no matter which direction this flows, from the MD to the KD, or from the KD to the MD, the KD has to verify that it's correct and reject the connection if it's not correct. Like, that's the important part to me. So I sort of wonder if we're going to end up with different people want to do this different ways, and we're just going to have to support it flowing both directions, or not at all, or not use it all. Like, I guess what I'm saying is there's a force option of do all 3 of the above and don't worry about it.
I think that would likely make this work take significantly longer than it already is.
Yes, I think it would make it like complicated. I think it would make it very complicated in terms to express all the different options on the table for an implementer. Regarding the concern whether you let someone into a conference or not, I think for the option number 3, basically, we could leverage basically the media keys as the token of authentication from the KMF. Basically, if the media distributor sits there and like forwarded like some tunnel DTLS to the KMF, and the KMF never sent him back like media keys for this participant, the media distributor can't do anything with that participant anyway. He will receive traffic from it, but he can't like decrypt it. So
Ronnie Evan, I think that there is also the case where the KMF is in one of the workstations or one of the endpoints, in which case he will provide this conference ID. So because he's also creating the conference and he knows the participants. So I think that makes sense to have the conference ID coming from the key management function, but also, like you said, I mean, it can come from the media distribution. Depends who create the conference. I mean, in the first place, it knows the information about the layer which knows who are the participant who is allowed to the conference.
Richard Barnes, the floor mic. I mean, I am sort of inclined, as usual, to not do work here. I am highly in agreement with Colin that I think when you sit down and try and integrate this thing into a real conferencing system, or a suite of real conferencing systems, you're going to have different answers to this. How do we assign associations to conferences in different scenarios? But I'm not sure we need to burden this protocol with all of that complexity. I think as long as these two participants, the 2 participants in this protocol, the KMF and the MD, can state clearly what conference they believe, what conference and what association they believe this packet to belong to, they can arrange those conferences and associations however they like at the signaling layer. And this protocol can just do its thing, and it can pass things back and forth as long as it says, you know, how it provides an anchor for the signaling to talk about. So my inclination here is just to have everything identified as conference and association, probably in both directions, and not really do anything beyond that. I don't think that entails well, I guess you have a conference ID there anyway, so I don't think that would entail the requirement that Nils stated about having different certificates. And I think if we arrive in a state where we think there's a requirement to have different certificates, we should engineer our way out of that state, because that's not really a tenable requirement.
what I came down here to say has been said. Oh, so no. What I can't. Sorry. No, the bit that I was going to observe was that because even if the MD, the statement is basically going to be broken MD is broken, right? If the MD decides it's going to send the media to the wrong place, then your conference is broken anyway. But there's no security problem here because the key won't be there.
Okay, so I think we had an argument against option 3 of using certificates, and against every option under the sun. And I think the direction Ronnie proposed actually makes the most sense to me. I mean, like if I had to pick one right now, I would say, like, let's have a conference ID from KD to MD, and if somebody comes up with a use case where they say we can't solve it with just that, we can go do it. But it just all falls back to what Rich said. You know, this is a signaling issue, not a all we need is an identifier here.
That sounds approximately correct to me. So one of the things that's been on my plate and pushed under a different pile of work is putting together something to talk about signaling for Web Rtc. I'm not trying to discourage anyone else from doing that. If anyone has cycles, please grab it and run. But I think that once we start that exercise, it'll be a little bit clearer how all of this needs to work anyway. So I think going with Roni's suggestion for now, and then, you know, figuring out whether that doesn't work once we get the signaling a little more specified is probably the best way to move forward with it. Sorry? Not right now. Yeah. Oh, right. Sorry.
All right, so this is one of the documents we've been talking about for a while that we have not formally adopted as a working group. And I think that was largely because there was some thrash in terms of, are we using DTLS, TLS? I think, judging by some of the reactions and we've gotten here, I think we've kind of stabilized on TLS. Of course, Ecker's not here to disassemble it this time.
That was me.
So could we have a quick hum to see if we'd like to adopt this document as a working group document? If you're in favor of adopting this document, please hum now. If you're opposed to adopting this document, please hum now. Okay, so we'll take this against the milestone that we had it against in the intro slides. So yeah, Christian Groves, please talk about the framework.
Okay, I'm presenting this on behalf of David and Paul, who can't be here at the meeting, so they've asked me to present these slides for them. So next slide. So there weren't a lot of changes in the latest version. As it mentions there, they're mainly to do with administrative things. There was a to-do list that needed to be addressed. And as mentioned there, that's been moved to GitHub, but that's a bit of a misnomer because there's actually nothing in GitHub except I think Cullen put something in about 4 hours ago or so. That, yeah, exactly. So yeah, that link takes you to that, and it's not even on this draft. So basically, they're all closed off, and they'll be discussed in later slides. The security section, that was empty in the last version, and to solve that problem, we've changed the title to a tax, from a tax on PERC to security considerations. So that one's addressed. Next slide. Okay, so I think with the last meeting there were some discussions about the different types of configurations that the media distributor could act in. There's been some text added that it's only acting as a selective forwarding middle box with the constraints that the actual draft contains. So that was closing one of the action items. There was also another action item with regards to one-way media injection. So that's putting things like announcements and things in. Basically, that was removed because there didn't seem to be any interest in that. So next page. Okay. basically, there was the issue with the conference ID, but we've just discussed that previously. So we basically just point to the double draft, giving those details. So that would need to be reflected. What have we discussed at this meeting? To the trust section, we basically point to the Web Rtc draft and the list of header RTP header extensions. We've pointed to the double draft for that. So as Colin mentioned earlier. So I think that's it. Next slide. I think that's the end. Yep. So that's it.
So actually, Christian, one before you step down, one of your slides, I was not quite fast enough to pull the document. One of your slides said it refers over to the tunnel draft for details in terms of conveying conference IDs. Do you happen to remember if that is consistent with what we just discussed?
I think it just points to the document and says conference ID C. So there's only one line. So
okay,
as I said, it's
so
just
not in any detail.
Yes, I don't think there's any real detail in that, but
okay,
whatever it is, we'll have to align it depending on what comes out in the tunnel draft.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Cool. I'm going back to share slides now.
Yeah. All right. Speedy meeting, folks.
Yeah.
Practical. All right. So, what now? Why don't you go back up to the milestone slides? So, milestones, we have them. And now we have adopted documents against 3, and I think pretty mature ones for the most part. So the question is, how much more work do we want to do? At this point, we've got our media layer kind of stable, the key management layer kind of stable, and the next thing to launch into would be the signaling layer, where we decide how we arrange such a conference in these various environments, in the SIP context, in the Web Rtc context, and the CLUE context. And so at this point, I just kind of wanted to, since we have kind of the media layer approaching completion, I wanted to stop and take a look at what our energy is, what our implementer interest is, and to see whether we want to now proceed to launch into the signaling work, or whether we want to try and close out these media layer documents and then come back to, let people experiment with how they can put that together and come back to the signaling questions later. So could I solicit any feedback from implementers, what folks in the group, about what we are interested in doing at this point? Adam.
From a practical perspective, and this is Adam Roach, and this is kind of echoing what I said earlier, I think that once we start writing down how the information needs to get among nodes with the signaling, we may learn some things about what we've done here that makes that more difficult than necessary. So I would be very hesitant to put this in front of the IESG and then have to go, oh, wait, that didn't work. We need to add a field or remove a field or move something around. So I think we probably, these are in pretty good shape. Go ahead and say, we're going to stop working on these for now. They're just going to sort of sit there until we have a good shape for the signaling. We don't have to be done, but just good data flows, a notion of how these things get from one place to another. And then we can go ahead and start calling these finished once we're comfortable that they're going to satisfy the needs of the signaling. That's what I would recommend.
So Adam, while you're at the mic, could I ask you to briefly put on your implementer hat and speak to what level of interest, what your plans are at this point?
Yeah, so we had a co-op come in and work on putting a KMF in Firefox this summer. We didn't finish that, but we got some work done in that space. And there's been planning out to figure out exactly what we need to get the other parts in place. There are some decisions that we're going to have to make around things like EKT, where I know that there are differing opinions about whether that should be an application level thing or something that actually goes inside TLS that we're going to want to nail down. But we definitely, there's interest. We don't have people assigned to it. And we'll try to keep pushing it forward as we can. I don't know if that's the answer that you want. That's from a client perspective. What I would love is if there were, a similarly nascent effort somewhere to have some sort of an MD, because there's no way we're ever going to have resources inside Mozilla to build that.
Hi, I'm Sean Turner. I'm not an implementer, so take it for what that's worth. I think you should just drive forth and try to get this stuff done. So I'll take the opposite approach from what Adam suggested, is that it seems like in art, we start and we kind of do some things and we let it sit for a while, write a bunch of other documents, and they all kind of like change everything and we never get done. So my theory is just drive forth. If you think this is right, that's great, get it done. If you do the next thing, you go, we did it. You can update the few things that you did in the other spec and just move on and get done. Let's strive for completion.
Colin, I mean, I don't care if everything blocks in RFC editor queue or blocks sitting on the AD's desk or whatever on just whatever, but I really want it off my desk. No, I mean, like, I want to, like, right now we've got all this stuff sort of in our head or a certain portion of it, and I'd like to get it out. I don't want to spread ourselves so thin across so many different things. I'd rather finish one thing, move on to the next, even if that puts us at high risk of needing to go back and redo something. And I'm willing to leave the things we think are done sitting on a shelf, waiting to confirm that they actually worked like we hope we were. Because Adam's right, we're going to find stuff that, like, I'm not arguing, like, I don't disagree with your overall view. Yeah, but I don't, I don't want to be, I don't want to have just everything open. I want to take a bunch of pieces of this tint and pin them down hard. And unless it's proven that we need to move those pins, just leave them pinned down as much as we can so that we can move on with things.
I think that's what I proposed. We might have some sort of disagreement about exactly what that means in terms of like IETF document state. It's I mean, are you proposing we send this off to the IASG and then just like yank it back if we decide it's wrong? I mean, because I think the worst thing that would happen here is like we have something published in RFC and decide, oh, we have to do a BIS 4 months later. Yeah. We're going to run into this 5-digit problem pretty soon.
I'm not exactly sure where I'm proposing that they sit. What I'm proposing is they're not an open work item that the working group's dealing with, and if that means they're, you know, sitting with the chairs waiting to do a pub request on them, I'm perfectly fine if they sit there or something else. But I will say that the Web Rtc chairs have been sending everything to sit in the RFC editor queue, and when we find it's wrong, which we often do, we yank it back again. It may not be the best principle, but you can let this stuff sit anywhere.
I did want to comment, Sean. I appreciate your perspective on this, but PERC is nowhere near as large as Web Rtc.
And let me just be clear, the chairs don't want this on our desk either. So I'm probably just going to go slap it on the AD's desk. So maybe the AD would like to chime in. So, I mean...
So, exactly. Are you saying you hit the pub rec but not really button?
I mean, I think at this point we could probably, well, once we kind of get these things through last call and a couple more rounds of review, I think we'd probably say that at this point in time, without a ton of implementation experience, we believe these are pretty good. These are at least a reliable snapshot of what we think is okay for now to solve this problem at this layer. Now, I think that would be okay to publish as a PS with the understanding that it might need to be updated later. We could downgrade to experimental if that's the RAD's advice. But I think this is useful to capture as a snapshot of what work got done here, which as a possible baseline for some future work. Oh, 2 AD coverage. Let's see if they're consistent.
Well, technically, I guess. It really, to me, comes down to how likely you think it is to need to do short-term changes. Obviously, there's uncertainty there. I'll take the working group's assessment of what that uncertainty is. If you think you're going to have to pull it out of the RFC editor queue, or you think you're going to have to BIS it 3 months down the line, then I would probably rather not. But if you think this is what this is our best we can know right now, we think it's probably right, then I think it makes sense to go ahead and go forward. We can talk about proposed standard versus something else, but if the final point is to be proposed standard, I would lean that way.
Russ Housley, my view is you don't want IETF last call on the other side of wherever you park it, right? So that you pull it back, last call, pull it back, last call, pull it back. Let's not do that. Let's park them somewhere this side of IETF last call.
Ronnie Evan, I didn't hear anyone trying to volunteer to do the signaling part, so we don't have a choice on that. Yeah. On the other hand, I think it would be good, at least when people read it during working group last call, that they should see, at least if it makes sense in the way they think about how this whole architecture works. And that probably we should say it when we do the working group last call, to ask the people also to look at that also.
Yeah, and then the next step after we finish this conversation is going to be to ask for some reviewers for these things.
Alyssa Cooper, yeah, I'm just agreeing with Russ. I think I like to think about this in terms of like who in the community has signed up to do what. And so, like, generally speaking, the IESG has signed up to review your document once. So you don't really want to send it back to them. And kind of the same thing for IETF last call. Like, most documents, if they don't receive a lot of feedback in the first round, they don't get multiple IETF last calls, and we shouldn't like burden the whole community with having to review something twice. Whereas the working group and the working group chairs have signed up for more than that. And so, you know, for you to declare consensus and write a pub rec and send it to Ben and for him to evaluate it and then have it sit there, if you end up pulling it back and you have to do that again, well, that's what you signed up for, so.
Yeah. And actually, that was what I came up to talk about, is that I think on a draft by draft basis, there are probably very different decisions to be made here. I think, you know, we can probably feel pretty confident about the framework. We can probably feel pretty good about double. EKT needs more work in the working group because we have, like I said, unfortunately, Ecker is not here, but
Ecker thinks we should take that to working group last call, and he thinks it's probably right, but reserves the right to explode it in working group last call. So that's the end outcome with Ecker.
Okay, so take it to working group last call while wearing asbestos.
Well, so just to be clear, for EKT, do you think that is something that is likely to change as a result of people working on integrating this with higher layers?
That was the point that I was making. Is the defect with EKT is isolated. It's going to be, you know, how do we want EKT to work in general, and no other document's going to modify that. Tunnel, I think, has to wait on the protocol documents, the signaling documents, to be further along, which is to say, exist.
So maybe I should come to the floor for this, but I'm not going to. So I wonder if the tunnel document has enough extensibility in it with this message type struct it has, that if we needed different semantics out of it, we could rev it just by defining some new message types instead of having to open up the patient again.
I would hate for IETF process issues to show up on the wire, and that's what you're proposing.
I mean, the thing's got a version field, right? If you've been paying attention to TLS lately, version fields are useless unless you use them.
So, I mean, if you want me to pay the property tax for this thing to sit inside PERC for a few more months, I'm happy to do that. I mean, the prospect that you're worried about having one additional document sitting there, you know, missing milestones from time to time, seems a little academic.
Well, see, I was planning to close the working group once we got these all pushed up to the IESG.
Sure, but that's not happening until the signaling documents move forward. I'm not saying that.
Well, back to Roni's point, though, if nobody wants to do the signaling, then we're not going to do the signaling.
If no one wants to do the signaling, close the group and don't publish these.
Well, no, I don't think that follows, because if we have these specs out for the media layer, then they define a system that people can go out and use and see if they can integrate with into real systems.
The prospect of putting together an interoperable system based on what's here and no signaling seems very low.
Let me ask a question on in which interoperable parts you mean. If the MD and the KD came from the same vendor, but the endpoints for a different vendor is a very different question than if the KD and MD are coming from different vendors. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah. For example, like if I think in some of the scenarios, at least I've seen mooted, from the endpoint's point of view, the signaling looks pretty much like standard SDP, except you're going to negotiate double and do EKT on the wire. So if you have this, you can implement an endpoint that can interoperate with all sorts of conferences, however you do the signaling, as long as you have that kind of, standardization properties. So that, you can make some progress with just this document set.
Just to add to what Richard said, we do have a prototype implementation that takes the double and parts of tunnel and does HTTP magic to do it. But you hack the HTTP to negotiate a different cipher. That's not a real production implementation, but it can be done.
Right. It's easy to say I have this working with stuff that I wrote and stuff that I wrote and stuff that I wrote.
Sure.
But if you do that, you don't need the IETF.
Sure.
So I'll tell you what, I just heard Colin say that he's not opposed to like putting his own pen down to paper. So I think if I can like twist his arm into doing something, and I'll help him.
I was going to help you.
All right. So I think the two of us and a copy editor will get together and try to come up with something that works here. Do you think we can have something for Chicago?
Yeah.
It's realistic. Okay. So I'm sorry, we're going to throw something in the middle of this working group that's going to cause you to continue to do work as a chair. But I believe that we have just committed to having something at least in either SIP or Web Rtc, probably Web Rtc, for the signaling.
Okay. Ronnie, you want to help on this one too?
Or Christian?
So, Ronnie, what I heard from Colin, what I heard from Colin is that the one that we need, there are two things that we need to clarify there. First is how does the endpoint know that it has to do this double encryption, and the other thing is how the MKF and the media distribution connect to each other and learn about each other. I don't think it's complicated, but I don't think you can have a solution without having this tied up. So it's not only the part that can come from the same vendor, the MKF and the media distributor, but also the endpoint, how to know that it must do these protocols.
Okay. All right. So sounds like the plan. I'm hearing consensus on a plan of roughly. Christian, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was just saying for the work on the PERC clue, we really need the Web Rtc signaling. So that sort of can't continue until we have some sort of signaling solution. So I'd be interested in that.
Yeah. So maybe like the 3 or 4 of you guys could be able to get something started there. So yeah. So I was saying, I think I'm hearing coalescence around a plan of roughly the following form. We can take the EKT double and framework drafts and start progressing them. EKT may be lagging a little bit behind, but start getting those last called and into the queue. We'll give this little team until Chicago to produce something for signaling, and then we'll take a look at what we've got there, and we'll leave tunnel open pending that work. Does that sound about right? Adam's giving me a thumbs up. Ronnie?
Yeah, I think because you're going to ask two reviewers anyhow on all documents, not also on the tunnel. So whether you call it working group last call as a reviewer or you do review pre-working group last call, I don't think it makes much difference. You can do working group last call on all of them if you want. It's the same thing because we need reviews now.
Yeah. All right. So with that, let me write down the names of the drafts. Start calling for names. Yeah, we are progressing EKT. So what I'm about to do is ask for reviewers for EKT, double, tunnel, and framework. Those are all going to progress more or less. We'll probably go ahead and start pushing EKT double and framework through the IESG process once we've gotten done with working group stuff. And tunnel we will leave open pending signaling discussion. Thank you, Mo. So we have 4 drafts we're looking for reviewers. Let's start with EKT. Could I have a couple of reviewers for EKT? Sean, you're in the front row and you're a TLS competent person. And Russ to review it again. Great, thanks guys. How about the double encryption draft? Sean again. Sean and Russ, great.
Apparently Russ gives excellent reviews anyway.
Those should actually be, those will be sensible to review together. They're both pretty compact. The tunnel draft. This one has a little bit more relation to signaling, so maybe some more Rye guys. Ronnie, Cullen, Jonathan maybe? Okay. All right, so Ronnie and Cullen. And finally, the framework draft. Ronnie again. One more. Okay, great. Great. So yeah, if we could aim to get those reviews in the next 3 or 4 weeks, we'll start sending some emails around about that if we don't see them. But that overall sounds like a plan. I look forward to seeing the work from, yeah, roughly. in that brief period of work time in December. So yeah, I think that's about all we have for today. I look forward to seeing what the signaling geniuses come up with. Again, don't leave it until Chicago. If you make some progress earlier, maybe I will even schedule a virtual interim in January or so to inspire progress. And I think with that, we are at the end of our agenda. Any other business for now? All right, then we are adjourned. Thanks. And where are the blue sheets? Anybody got a blue sheet?
Oh no, it's despite the cliche.
All right, that was easy.
Yeah.
This is one version of the document that says how they all work together, right? Yeah, maybe I can just get there's some. All these things we use. All these things we use as signaling to capturing that stuff like we proved kind of bring me to the discipline works the way it's just the details. Yeah, to identify the it's a double act. But maybe you can so a way for the system is not the easiest way to add stuff, right? Probably will kind of I think